Welcome back to the H3X podcast, where Dave Miller and I, Mark Gearing, we explore the head, the heart, the hands of the multiplying church and her leaders. And today, Dave and I are coming from our same locations in New York City and Oklahoma City, but with the same weather. And so we've got
Yeah, dreary and cold.
the dreary, overcast, rainy weather. And it's got us both thinking about and talking about seasons in the work. And so I want to toss this to Dave, but we talk about oftentimes in our disciple making, church planting, that there are habits and rhythms involved in this work that we live out day to day. And then we do that season to season over the course of a long time. And so I want to tee this up and get your thoughts on this, Dave. Sometimes we'll use this phrase, we overestimate what can be accomplished in a year, and we underestimate what can happen in 3 years. What do we mean by that when we say that, Dave?
Well, usually what that means is that we want to microwave things instead of crock pot things. As
Yep.
Americans, we want to just go full steam ahead and give as much time as we can and then accomplish it and then say it's accomplished. And we just want it now. We want it quick. And we want the magic bullet like most of the time when we're trying to get things done. And so we always overestimate what we can get done in a year. And when we lean back into habits and rhythms, we super underestimate how effective habits and rhythms are over the long haul, which means over the course of 3 years, how much they can change thinking and culture and habits and direction and multiplication. It just takes time. People take time.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about this idea, this concept of multiplication, it can get into our thinking, this idea of speed and things happening quickly, when in reality, I think that's one of the things that's been a wake up call in actually doing this stuff over the years,
Oh,
is
yeah.
that so much of seeing disciples multiply is not about there's this point along the way where you hit this tipping point and things accelerate and things happen faster. In reality, if you're continuing to do the work personally, you never really experience that. You are
Mm-mm.
always continuing to work along and do those basic habits and rhythms, and there's hard seasons, but more people are doing it. That's the biggest change, is over time you begin to have more people engaged in the work. And so part of what we're talking about today is just how do we have a perspective that's a longer term perspective on the work so that we stay in it, we keep going, and we rightly view what's happening in front of us.
Yeah, and I think, in the past we've made the illustration where to the individual, multiplication feels like a snail's pace, but to the outsider looking in after 3, 4, 5, 6 years, they look at it and they go, "Man, you guys are flying. How did you get there so fast?" And it's like as a whole, it may seem fast, it may seem rapid, it may seem multiplicational, explosive, whatever word you want to use, but I think, Mark, our experience has been as an individual, no matter how big or how fast it looks from the outside, as an individual, it still feels slow and mundane and all the pieces because, like you said to your point, it's not the quickness is not me. The quickness is in us. But
Yeah.
me doing my part, along with all of us doing our part, tends to pick up the pace and the ability to multiply. But people as an individual, we're just slow when it comes to growth. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because we're having to retrain habits. We're
Yep.
having to retrain our thinking. We're having to be molded and shaped into the image of Christ. And I don't know about you, but in my life, I've been at this now as a believer for over 40 years, and I still think to myself how slow I am. Like, why haven't I sped up a little bit on some of the things that Christ has tried to teach me?
Well, and I think you hit on it. That was before we hit record. Just jumping on today, Dave, and part of it's the weather. It's right at the end of what feels like another long winter, but I think some of it is also an internal check. Just where am I at in my own inner life? But realizing that so much of this is about managing expectations. That
Oh, yeah, there you
if
go.
I if I continue to just when I was 22 and I started to follow Jesus, I just had these grandiose ideas about what it would be like to follow him, what I would see, how that would happen. We'd be going here, we'd be doing this, and we I've gotten to see some amazing things, and God is faithful. But I think so much of being able to stay in this journey over the years and now decades has been about setting my expectations rightly to be able to continue to steward day in and day out and then look back with right reflection. So that idea of that phrase, we overestimate what can be accomplished in a year and underestimate what can happen in 3 years, really is about beginning to rightly view my own efforts of the kingdom and those around me as we patiently steward.
Yeah, definitely setting those expectations because um, a couple of days, actually, just yesterday, we're rainy, we're overcast, right? We're dreary. They said we're going to rain all week long. I don't know about you, and anybody who may be watching with us, even right now or later. But my family makes statements like this all the time. My son came home. He went to the gym after school. He walked in the door about 4:30, and he goes, "Man, today's a nap kind of day." And he went into his bedroom and he took a nap. And
Yeah.
it's like, 100%. My wife goes, "That's a good idea," right? Like, there's something about just the overcast dreariness where everything inside of you just kind of like slows down and you think to yourself, nobody's out, nobody's doing anything. This is kind of a get a blanket, get on the couch, take a nap, read a book kind of day. That's an emotional response, right? That's
Yes.
feelings that are involved with that. And I think, Mark, when we set expectations too high, we tell ourselves that those high expectations are going to motivate us to do things, but
Yeah.
our feelings get wrapped up into those expectations. And I think what we just need to do is not that we're setting the bar lower, we're just extending the time in which we feel like we can reach the bar. Because when we get in a funk, whether it's the weather, whether it's the response of maybe a disciple, whether it's the flow of a church that we're in, we're going to go through these seasons where we're going to go highs and lows and highs and lows. And if we have to be on the constant, like, high all the time, I don't know about you, we just get exhausted. Like, we burn
Yes.
ourselves out and we end up short circuiting and having to recharge whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
And I think resetting those expectations really gives us space to breathe, to be consistent, because you and I talk about CFC, committed, focus, and consistency. I think understanding seasons and knowing and setting expectations of timelines helps us to learn to be consistent because our emotions can be in line with our habits and our rhythms.
Well, so I'm gonna switch over now and interview you a little bit on this day. Before we hit record, another topic that we were talking about along these lines. You're a big Willard fan. I am as well, although
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't keep up with all of his thoughts the way that you can. So I talked to David. I'm like, what did he say? So you then can help me to understand it. But um, I immediately hear what you're saying. I resonate with it because I'm living it right now. That here in this literal season that we're in, I used to look outside the window, the dreariness of it, but then just that's a reality of life. It leads us to say, how do we engage in spiritual practices to be able to continue to be faithful, to have those right expectations around what's happening in our life? And you've been reading a lot of Willard, and you even just gave a little overview of some of those different categories of how to approach that. Can you tee that up for us? What are some categories that we could think in terms of how to approach managing those expectations?
Well, a couple of ways that Dallas Willard, in The Divine Conspiracy, and then also in his book about spiritual disciplines, he divides spiritual disciplines into those of abstinence, abstaining, and then those of engagement. And so we've got disciplines where we're abstaining from certain things, and then we've got disciplines where we're intentionally engaging and growing in certain things. And as we were talking today, winter time, the season of winter, just lends itself to solitude and silence. Um, And that's one of his abstinence ones that has really struck me, because you and I have talked about on the podcast in the past, going through the chronological storying and mapping of Jesus's life through the Gospels on Tuesday nights with the group that I'm doing. And the thing that has really resonated with me as I'm reading Willard, along with lots and lots and lots of reading of the Gospels, is the way in which Jesus pauses. And we all know that he does that, right? Where he gets away, and he gets interrupted a lot, but the number of times when Jesus gets away by himself, even the story when he comes walking on the water, and the famous thing where Peter gets out of the boat, the only reason that Jesus was walking on the water is because he was trying to go from where he spent seclusion time away from them, and he was going to try to outrun them and meet them on the other side of the lake. So he was just going to
Mhm.
walk across the lake to catch up with
Mhm.
them whenever they got there. That's the whole reason that even started. Um, that idea of silence and seclusion is huge for us to abstain from the noise, right? Um, just getting away from all the messages, all the pounding, all the things. And if Jesus was having to do it, uh, we need to pay attention to that and make a habit of silence and seclusion, and where that the Sabbath rest isn't the legalistic kind of like you have to do this on a certain day of the week, but it's understanding that the Sabbath was made for humans, and that means we need getaway time. We need silence. We need Thanksgiving, and we need recuperation time because we're human.
Yes, we need that as a part of what it means for us to function rightly. And I thought it was another interesting observation you were making in the timing of that solitude and silence for Jesus. And I think because of our culture and where we place our celebration of the resurrection of Jesus on the first day of the week, we think of that as, okay, I'm going to go and take some time before this week starts to orient myself to prepare for the week. But to notice that in the ministry of Jesus, those times of solitude came at the end of
Mhm.
periods of work and ministry. Can you talk about that for a minute, where those were or
Yeah.
why?
Yeah, I mean, for me, even over the last 4 or 5 years, realizing that the Sabbath was the end of the week instead of the beginning of the week, was a really big piece where it's like we're resting from our work, and that resting is not so much preparation as it is thanksgiving, and realizing that the spiritual recharge for my spiritual life and for me getting ready for the next week is not so much about storing up energy as much as it is
Yeah.
reflecting back and thanking the Lord for all the things that he did. And I think that there's an element that when we spend time in Thanksgiving, and in Jesus's case, after he did huge amounts of ministry work, he was exhausted, and he would go into those times of solitude and silence and in seclusion and be away with the Father after he had done tons and tons and tons and tons of work. And it wasn't because he was saying, I don't think it was because he was saying, I'm out of steam. It was coming and saying, I've
Yeah.
given everything that you gave me. Thank you for that. Recognizing the grace that has been given to us. And if we reflect on the grace that had been poured out in the past, then we're not going to be afraid of the future because we realize that that grace is unlimited, and it resets our hearts to go. If God gave me the grace for how hard it was last week, then he'll give me the grace for whatever's going to come the next week. And if we practice that habit of thanksgiving, of reflection, of identifying the grace of God in our lives, I think we can recharge, but we need to do that on a regular basis or we will burn out.
hmm Yeah, I think that's what has been hitting me today is how critical managing our expectations is in being able to sustain and continue in following Jesus. I mean, years is good, decades is better. What does it look like to follow him for a lifetime? It really is about that reset moment. And so to pause in this season for me and to look back not just on the last year, but on several years and realize, wow, yeah, these are some things that happen every year around this time. And here are some ways that I see that God has worked in our city and in our connections, our network, and to be able to, in that, not only see what He's doing, but it allows me to go back to resting in my own role in that and trusting that what he has done, he continues to do. So I'm realizing that again, how important the stepping away is for coming back to the place of trust and dependency, maybe is the word.
So, like, while you've lived in New York, Mark, now you guys have been there for a number of years. You've watched the rhythm, the yearly rhythm, along with the seasons, the literally the weather, and how the city reacts to that. How have you found that ministry doesn't have to wrestle against that, but can get in line with a little bit of the process of how the seasons kind of create that structure for isolation or create the structure for engagement, right? How does the abstinence and the engagement kind of disciplines that we talked about that we're seeing and Willard's helping us to understand really fit into how you can approach ministry over the years in New York? What's the things you've seen?
Yeah, well, I appreciate Jim. I see Jim's name on there on today, and he's been in the city for decades. I've only been here a few years now, but long enough to begin to see that to be true. And I think there is a rhythm of life that's like breathing, and I would guess this is true for everybody who will listen to this in the way that we begin to discern rhythms. Because I think as a young man um, I didn't either I didn't notice it or just arrogantly didn't care, and I just thought
Yeah.
just, um
We'll go with the didn't notice.
yeah, we'll be kind to me. But I think I hit 5th gear and uh, just judged people around me. What's their problem? Why are they running so slow? There's so much to be done. There's so many opportunities. If this is slowing
Right,
down over here, I'll just hit that gear and jump over to this other area and hit pedal to the metal here and let's roll.
right,
And I
right.
think maybe that's what comes with age is you begin to either just slow down or also maybe just begin to recognize your own arrogance and pride. But I've begun to see how much of life itself follows breathing. And so there's times where it breathes in, and that's where we are right now in wintertime. And then it breathes out again. And we'll have this expansion and we'll have people out again and people receptive, and we'll start to have more opportunity to sow the gospel. And I think that's the biggest thing I've seen in New York City and have come to accept and try to allow our rhythms to shape around is to see when do we need to recognize natural rhythms of harvest and sharing and going, and then when do we need to recognize natural rhythms of things slow down. And this year, as things slowed down, we had a few disciples get baptized and respond to Jesus, and then they most of them have ghosted and disappeared,
Mhm.
and that can be disheartening in that, um, but that's where in our conversation, I'm valuing the idea of reflection, of solitude and reflection to see how that's true right now, but if I look at the larger scale and the longer time frame, we keep going, we trust God. God may even bring those people back around, but it's in me seeing that we did the best we could to steward what God has shown us about the rhythms of the city, and then we've got to come to a place of just trusting Him to allow Him to bring forth the fruit.
You know, I'll talk about that rhythm too in my business. After spending 10 years in my dry cleaning business, I know that my low months are going to be January and July. And I know that my high months are going to be March, April, depending upon when the weather change hits, or October, November. I've got to wait on the big swings in the temperature for us to really ramp up.
Yeah.
And it's really easy. I was telling you, like, my P&L was abysmal in January, but it's been abysmal in January for 10 years. And if we just kind of like tunnel vision ourselves into the very moment that we're in, we can get panicked and our emotions can get imbalanced and we can get
Yes.
anxiety and things that we don't need. Because if you're somebody who says, let's go back to what we're saying, I'm going to accomplish this in 1 year, you can't think about how January is different than April if you're
Right.
only focused on doing it in a year.
Right.
If you're focused on 3 years or 10 years, you can really see, oh, for me, January is very different than April. And so the behaviors that I have in my business, I strategically do things in January that I'm not going to do in April because they're not going to stick and they're going to be there. But also understanding the difference between summertime and wintertime. In the ministry side of things in Oklahoma City, Bible studies indoors, around kitchen tables, in homes, for lengthy periods of time around coffee is really, really good. You try to do that in the summertime, you're not going to get people who are going to come consistently. It doesn't make any sense. And so I'll get a membership, an unlimited membership to Top Golf, for instance, in the summertime. And I'll say to the guys, we're not going to gather around a table. We're going to gather around a table at Top Golf and we're going to
Yeah.
swing golf clubs while we talk about it for 2 hours. And I'll get guys consistently coming. So I'll get that's what's weird, Mark, is like in January, I could get a group of guys around a table and a cup of coffee for 2 hours, no problem. But in July, I've got to take them to Top Golf around coffee, and then knowing that in the wintertime, the conversations are really deep thinking wise because they're thinking more. And in the
Mhm.
summertime, it's got to be much more skill
Yeah.
oriented. Let's go out and let's practice these things. Let's do these things. So it's much more hands in the summer, much more heart in the winter, and then just letting those rhythms just happen. And instead of fighting them, just get on board with it. And I think, Mark, that's partly the way that God's designed us. Like He's created us to breathe in and breathe out with the seasons and to recognize this as his pattern. And I think if we get in the flow of that order, it takes a lot of the stress off of us, right? Where we're just like, you know what, God, I'm just going to get on board with your season and your rhythms and make use of it.
Yeah, Jim wrote here, I like the use of the phrase of rule of life from the church fathers. It's a good practice to form one for cities' rhythms so that it doesn't overwhelm the kingdom rhythms and purposes. Yeah, that's right on.
Thanks, Jim. There you go.
Yeah, you put it well. That this idea of settling in, and again, I think Jim is a old guy too. So I guess as we get
Old
older,
New Yorker on
he's an
top of
old
it.
New Yorker. He's got the double whammy. We start to learn, and so I think that's really been helpful for me to understand there are rhythms to all of this, and we have to settle into trusting God in the rhythms. So, uh,
As we kind of land the plane today, Mark, I kind of want to ask the question. Back whenever you were 22 and I was 22, we were both the same. We're going to say that we weren't paying attention, but we both know that the truth was is that it was probably more arrogance than it was ignorance,
yes,
and a terrible combination of arrogance and ignorance put together. But God has been super faithful and patient and kind with us. Here's the question that I want to say is if we look at, yeah, you can accomplish more in 3 years than you can in 1 year, we're making an expectation statement with that, where we're saying, just know that rhythms and habits really get more done over the long term than big spurts of just high activity, high energy, kind of like pushes. It doesn't mean that we
yes,
never have pushes. It doesn't mean that we never interject and try to get momentum back with some strategic kind of bursts of focus and energy. Those are all good things. But I think the question that really needs to be asked is, especially for someone who's living in the scenario of New York that is so
yeah.
brutal, how does not as how does one accomplish what one wants to accomplish in 3 years in New York, but how does one still continue doing the same things 30 years later in New York? What kind of life do you need to lead? And what kind of rhythms do you need to have in terms of abstinence and engagement in the spiritual disciplines that will allow you to still be going strong, consistent, faithful, and focused, right? 30 years from now.
Yeah.
Because we may knock a whole lot out in 5 years, but at the end of 5 years, if we so burn ourselves out that we can't get back and get going again for another 5 years, I don't think that that's healthy. If we look at it and we go, I want to be at this for a lifetime. What do I need to do to make sure that 40 years from now, I can still be plugging away consistently at the same thing? I think it really changes the dynamic. And you and I now in our 40s are asking that question because we realize we weren't as strong and spry as we thought we were in our 20s, and that you can't keep that pace forever. And so I think part of it is our middle age is coming out in conversation, start laughing. Like, I tried to tell you that, right? We're now in the same shoes where we're going, I'm trying to tell you guys this. But the question is not just how do you accomplish more in 3 years than you do in one, but how do you still be accomplishing things in 30 years? If the Lord carries and he allows that much life, what kind of life do you need to leave to make sure you can still be consistent 30 years from now?
Well, I like how you teed that up like I'm going to have an answer to this, but I will say I think the topic that we always talk about of habits and rhythms, I'm seeing more and more the longer that I do this to be a disciple and to make a disciple, how critical and central that is. That I've got to have habits in my life of being one that follows and fishes every day of my life. And I've got to have rhythms of doing that within a a target focused people group or oikos in my life, a relational network where I'm doing that. And then I've got to begin to teach other people to do the same because so much of the answer to what you're talking about is I can't do this alone. I need other people that are also engaging in those habits and rhythms as I'm raising them up to do the same. And then they're coming alongside of me in those. And as we do that together, it's that shared habits and rhythms that really begins to create that momentum.
You know, it's funny, we talk about brilliance and the basics, core value culture a lot. And when we talk about those brilliance and basics, we say identify a habit that's going to be proactive and helpful, and then practice that habit until you master it. And then a third thing is when that habit becomes something that's basically second nature, in other words, it's your new automatic, then identify another habit to start working on and work through that. But the fourth line is identify a destructive habit that gets replaced by a proactive and helpful habit. And what we're looking at as we talk about this is to say, if habits and rhythms really are this important, and if we're going to have a framework where we're not trying to just accomplish everything in a year, but we are looking 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line in our activities, then that gives us the space mark that we need to say, I can attack a character habit or
Yeah.
a base understanding or really go after something in my life that I know I can't turn around overnight. And instead of going, I don't have time for that, you look at it and you go, I don't have time to not do that.
Yeah.
And you give yourself that space to really, within a community, start to go, where do I need to grow? And what do I need to replace? And so, as we kind of wrap up today, even, I asked the question of ourselves and anyone who's listening, what is a habit in your life right now that you know if you are still doing it 10 years from now will be nothing but destructive in your life?
Yeah.
You know that if I default to this activity, doom scrolling, responding with anger whenever you don't get your way, um, maybe it's ignoring the people that are closest to you in your life because it's easy right now. Whenever you have to make a choice between something new or something or an old relationship that you need to maintain, you go with the new instead of the maintenance. Whatever that destructive habit may be, ask yourself, if I keep doing this 5 years from now, what will it do to the people who are going to still be around me 5 years from now? And if that habit starts to become a norm in the culture that I'm leading or I'm a part of, what will it do to our community?
Yeah.
And if you look at that and you go, that's not healthy, that's only destructive, you need to identify that and then ask the question that Paul asked in Colossians 3. What do I need to put off? But also, what do I need to put on in its place? And then identify the biblical good habit that leads to life and start now developing the practice of learning and the everyday little things in life, how to start responding naturally in the kingdom biblical way. Um, because if we're going to be doing this for the next few decades, Lord tarrying, and He gives us that much life, it matters.
Well, I appreciate ending this way, Dave, because I think in my younger years, I thought I just can kick it in gear and just keep rolling. And if stuff comes up, you just ignore it and you just go to another area and you push harder. But we started this podcast today just talking about how this even just literal season causes us to pause and reflect. And so it's in the pausing and reflecting, it allows us to pivot and realize, what do we need to weed out? What do we need to add in so that we can be faithful for decades? So appreciate digging into this with you today.
Yeah, no problem. So my teenage son comes in and goes, Dad, this day. I'll be like, you know what? Take a nap today. Now, if he was napping every single day of the year, I'd probably have a little bit of an issue. But I'm like, you know what? Slow down. Pause.
Yeah.
Take a little nap. Take a little rest. It'll be good for you. You know?
Well, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for hopping on and joining us on Substack Live today for those who did that. And then some of y'all listening in later. Hey, give us a review if you don't mind on our podcast. Helps us to get this out to more people. So we will see you guys next time.
See y'all.